For 2 months, my day started at 6:04 a.m. with his good morning text, a digital intimacy that felt more solid than concrete. We were past the games. We were honest. Until the night I was too honest. The next morning, 6:04 a.m. came and went, and the silence that followed was louder than any alarm I'd ever heard. The phone chimed on the nightstand at 6:04 a.m. It wasn't my alarm. That was set for 6:30. The sound was a single soft ping I had assigned only to him. I smiled before I was even fully awake, a slow, warm feeling spreading through my chest. I fumbled for the phone, the cool glass a familiar weight in my palm. The screen glowed. Mark, 50. Good morning. Already thinking about Friday. My apartment is all glass and exposed concrete, a place I designed as a fortress after my divorce. It faces east, and the early light was just beginning to slice across the polished floor. For 5 years, this view had been mine alone, a sterile, orderly comfort. Now, his texts were the first thing I saw. I typed back, "Good morning." Me too, it was true. I was 48 years old, a partner at my architecture firm, a woman who designed sleek, towering structures that were meant to last a century. My life was built on precision, on plans and blueprints where every variable was accounted for. And then, 2 months ago, Mark. He was a management consultant, a man who seemed to move through the world with an effortless, charismatic ease that I envied. We'd met at a tedious urban planning gala. I was there for the networking. He was, I think, just there for the free champagne. He'd caught me rolling my eyes at a keynote speaker and grinned. "My thoughts exactly," he'd murmured. For 2 months, my life had this new electric rhythm. The ping in the morning, the funny, self-deprecating memes he'd send in the middle of a stressful afternoon. The "how was your day?" text that felt less like a question and more like an actual vested interest. I'd look at my reflection in the mirrored glass of a new skyscraper, seeing the lines around my eyes, the faint silver in my dark hair, and I felt seen. Not just as Ilara, the architect, but as Ilara, the woman. He was different. He was 50, established, and he wasn't playing. He said so himself. That night, he'd chosen the restaurant. Aperture, 28th floor, with a view that made the city look like a scattered handful of jewels. The elevator hissed open to a room that smelled of saffron and something woody like burning sage. The hostess led me past tables of quiet, important-looking people. The decor was minimalist, just as the plan had promised. Bare marble tables, smoked glass partitions, and a single dramatic orchid at the center of the room. Mark was already there. He stood as I approached, and my heart did that stupid little kick. He was handsome, not in a fragile movie star way, but in a solid, real-world way. His silver-flecked hair was cut short. His suit was impeccably tailored, and his smile was a quick, bright thing that seemed to be just for me. "Ilara," he said, and kissed my cheek, his hand warm on the small of my back. "You look incredible." The city lights glittered outside, a perfect moving backdrop. We talked. He ordered a Pinot Noir he'd had before and insisted I try, describing the taste with a confidence I found intoxicating. He asked about the library annex I was designing, and he didn't just listen, he heard. He remembered the name of the difficult contractor I'd mentioned last week. "So, did you finally tell Greg to stick to the blueprints?" he asked, a playful glint in his eye. "I did," I laughed, in slightly more professional terms. "I told him the structural integrity depended on it." "Good," Mark said. "Boundaries." He topped off my glass. The conversation drifted, as it always did with him, from work to travel to the absurdities of modern life. He put his phone on the table, but face down. A deliberate act of presence. I'd done the same. After a while, he leaned forward, his forearms resting on the cool marble. The candle flame flickered, casting shadows up his face. "I hate this part," he said, his voice dropping a little. My stomach tightened. "This part? The food's been amazing." "No, not the restaurant." He gestured vaguely between us. The guesswork. The first few months, The where is this going? The what are we doing? The games. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. God, yes, I know exactly what you mean. My 20s were for that, he said. My 30s were for building a career. My 40s were for, well, a very expensive divorce. I'm 50, Alara. I'm done with games. My own marriage hadn't ended with a bang. It was a long, slow decay of shared silences and separate bedrooms, a ghosting that happened under the same roof. It had taken me years to even want to sit across a table from someone new, to risk that kind of emptiness again. I hear that, I said, my voice softer than I intended. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. His skin was warm, his grip firm. It wasn't a tentative, exploratory touch. It was a statement. I'm too old for games, Ilara. I just want a real partner. Someone honest. His thumb traced a small, lazy circle on my palm. Outside, the city lights blurred into a soft, beautiful haze. I looked at his hand, so solid and sure on top of mine. And I felt a lock click into place deep inside me. A mechanism I hadn't even known was still rusted shut. In that moment, sitting on the 28th floor with the world glittering at my feet, I felt completely, unequivocally safe. Back to my apartment was quiet, but in a good way, a comfortable silence. Mark held my hand in the back of the taxi, his thumb stroking mine in the same steady rhythm he'd used at the restaurant. The city blurred past the windows, a neon smear of reds and blues. I rested my head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of his cologne, something crisp and clean, like juniper and steel. The warmth of his body seeped through his suit jacket. That feeling of safety I'd had at dinner, it wasn't just in the restaurant. It was him. My apartment, when we walked in, was still. The only light came from the city itself, pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room. My home is my fortress, all polished concrete and cool glass, a place of sharp angles and deliberate emptiness. It was designed to keep the world at bay. Wow, Mark said, walking toward the window. You really live up here, don't you? Like a very stylish eagle. I smiled, flicking on a low-wattage floor lamp that cast a soft amber glow. I like the view. Can I get you anything? Water? A nightcap? No, I'm good, he said, turning from the glass. He motioned to the sofa, a long, low-slung piece of gray wool. Let's just sit for a minute. We sat. He didn't sit at the opposite end. He sat close, enough that our knees brushed, and he put his arm along the back of the sofa, his fingers lightly tracing the bare skin of my shoulder. The room was quiet, just the faint, distant hum of traffic from 30 stories below. That was nice, I said. The restaurant, the everything. It was, he said. He was looking at me, his gaze direct. I like this, Ilara. Us. My heart did that kick again. Me too, Mark, I really do. He smiled, a slow, easy smile that made his eyes crinkle. Good. Because I was thinking, that weekend getaway we talked about, for next month, I think I found a place. A couple of wineries, a great inn. We could just go. Disconnect. He said it so easily. Next month. A plan, solid and real, laid out like a blueprint, and just like that, a sudden cold downdraft hit me. My breath hitched, just slightly, but it was enough. The warmth I'd felt in the cab, the safety. From the restaurant, it didn't vanish, but it was suddenly fragile. I felt a familiar, metallic taste at the back of my throat. It was anxiety, old and unwelcome. He was planning next month. My ex-husband, in our last 5 years together, rarely planned the next day. He had been a master of emotional distance. A man who could be in the same room, at the same table, and make me feel like I was screaming into a void. I had become invisible, long before I had the courage to leave. Now, here was Mark, present, attentive, planning. and my first animal instinct was to find the exit. His words from dinner echoed in my head. No games, someone honest. I could just smile and say, "That sounds amazing." I could play the game, be the cool, uncomplicated woman who was just happy to go to wine country, or I could do the terrifying thing. I could be honest. I turned on the cushion to face him, pulling my legs up onto the sofa. The wool was slightly rough against my skin. I took a deep breath. The air felt too thin. "Mark," I started, my voice lower than I intended. I really like where this is going. I like it a lot, and I need to be honest about something." His smile softened into a look of concern. He nodded, patient. "Okay, talk to me." "This is hard to explain," I said, looking down at my hands, which were suddenly twisting in my lap. I forced myself to stop, to lay them flat on my knee. My marriage, my ex, he wasn't just distant, he was absent, even when he was there. For years I felt like I was completely invisible, like I didn't matter enough to even warrant a goodbye. It just faded. I looked up, meeting his eyes. "And you're the opposite. You're here. You're present. You text good morning, you remember. The name of my difficult contractor, you plan next month." I tried a small laugh, but it came out as a short, nervous huff. And sometimes, when someone is this present, like you are, this little irrational alarm bell goes off in my head. It's this deep, stupid fear that it's not real, that I'll wake up and it'll all be gone, just vanished. And it makes me want to pull back. It makes me want to put a wall up, even when all I want to do is lean in. The words hung in the quiet room. I'd said it. I'd handed him the messy, unrenovated floor plan of my anxieties. I watched his face, bracing for, I don't know what. Pity? A polite dismissal? He was quiet for a long moment. He didn't move. His hand, which had been on my shoulder, stilled. He wasn't looking at my eyes anymore. His gaze had drifted to a spot just over my shoulder, at the city lights. He was processing. Then, he blinked and his focus snapped back to me. He managed a small smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He brought his hand from my shoulder to my cheek, his touch light. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Thanks for telling me." He kissed my forehead, a brief, dry press of lips to skin. "That's a lot," he said, pulling back, his hand dropping to the cushion between us. "But I'm here. I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere." I let out the breath I'd been holding. "Okay." "Okay," he repeated. But the atmosphere had shifted. The air, which had been warm and charged, now felt thin and cool. He seemed reserved, as if I'd handed him a heavy object he hadn't asked for, and now he was politely holding it, wondering where to set it down. He glanced at his watch, a quick, almost reflexive movement. "It's getting late." He stood up. I unfolded my legs and stood too, feeling suddenly formal. "I'll walk you to the door," I said. At the door, under the stark white light of the entryway, he turned. "Friday," he said. "I'll text you." "Sounds good." He leaned in and kissed me goodnight. It was a real kiss on the lips, but it was brief and it felt careful. It lacked the easy confidence of his hello at the restaurant. It felt like an obligation. "Good night, Ilara." "Good night, Mark." I clicked the deadbolt, the sound unnervingly loud in the hallway. I leaned my back against the solid wood of the door, staring into the darkness of my perfect, minimalist apartment. The silence that rushed in to fill the space he'd left was different. It wasn't the comfortable silence of my fortress. It was an empty, echoing void. His words replayed in my mind. "I'm not going anywhere. But as I stood there, a cold, sharp seed of doubt began to sprout. I had just shown him the foundation, the messy, complicated truth. And I couldn't shake the feeling that he was already quietly backing away. Up at 6:30 a.m. to the shrill digital scream of my alarm, not to the 6:04 a.m. ping. I lay still for a moment, my eyes closed. The apartment was already bright, the morning sun hitting the concrete floor and refracting a hard clinical light across the ceiling. My first thought, instant and sharp, was he didn't text. My second thought was a full-body cringe that started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. The vulnerability hangover. It was real. It felt exactly like drinking too much cheap wine, but worse. A nauseating cocktail of regret and exposure. I felt like I'd walked into that meeting at Aperture, the one with the perfect view and the perfect man, and revealed a fatal flaw in my own structural design. I pushed myself out of bed. The silence of the apartment, my old orderly fortress, was back. But it wasn't comforting. It was just empty. I went to the kitchen, the polished concrete cold under my feet. I made coffee. The smell of the dark roast, usually my favorite part of the morning, just smelled bitter. I picked up my phone from the granite countertop. The screen was black. No notifications. I opened our message thread. The last message was his, from yesterday afternoon. Looking forward to tonight. Below that, nothing. I had to act normal. I couldn't be the anxious, irrational woman I had just confessed to being. He'd said he was busy. He'd probably just overslept. I had to prove I was the cool, understanding partner. My thumb felt heavy as I typed. Good morning, I stared at the words. Too plain? Too needy? I deleted them. I typed again. Morning. Hope your day isn't too brutal. I hit send. The blue bubble popped into place. The small gray word appeared beneath it. Delivered. Good. That was it. Normal. I put the phone down, screen side down, on the counter, and went to shower. 10 minutes later, I was out, a towel wrapped around me, water dripping on the bath mat. I picked up the phone. Nothing. I got dressed for work. Even though my office was just a glass-walled corner of my living room, I put on a silk blouse and trousers. Structure. Order. I needed the armor. I sat at my desk at 7:45 a.m., my coffee steaming beside me. My phone was placed on the desk, just to the left of my keyboard. Screen up, 9:00 a.m. I was supposed to be reviewing the structural load plans for the new library annex. Instead, I was staring at the delivered receipt. My partner Ben called. Laura, we have a problem with the zoning board. My heart leaped at the ring, then crashed. Oh, hi Ben. My voice was too sharp. What's the issue? I listened with half my brain. I made the right noises. I promised to email the city planning commissioner. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. Calm down, Alara. I forced my gaze to the blueprints on my monitor. Steel load, torsion, shear. This I understood. This was logical. Mark was logical too. He was busy. I remembered him mentioning it on Wednesday over text. This Q4 pitch is a monster. Thursday and Friday are going to be brutal. Back-to-back presentations, of course. That was it. He was a consultant. He was in one of those presentations right now, in a sleek boardroom, being the charismatic, confident man I'd been so drawn to. He was closing a deal. He couldn't be checking his phone. A wave of relief, so potent it made me dizzy, washed over me. He was just working. I was being ridiculous. I was being the woman I'd warned him about. I focused on my work. For 2 hours, I was the architect. I found a significant flaw in the HVAC ducting plan, a miscalculation that would have cost the client a fortune. I relished the fix. I moved lines, rerouted vents, dictated clear, precise notes. This was my world. Solid, solvable. At 1 p.m., my stomach growled. I hadn't eaten. I grabbed my phone and walked to the kitchen. Still nothing. The single blue bubble sat there, unanswered. The busy presentation excuse felt a little thinner. He always texted. Even on his busiest days, there was a ping around lunch. Swamped. TTYL. This meeting is killing me. A digital footprint, a sign of life. Today, there was only silence. I opened the fridge and stared at its contents. A tub of Greek yogurt, a half-empty bottle of white wine. I took a spoonful of the yogurt. It tasted like chalk, sour and thick. I spit it into the sink and rinsed my mouth, the metallic taste of anxiety returning. I looked at my phone again. Friday, he'd said last night. I'll text you. It was Friday. This was the day he was supposed to text me. This was the night we were supposed to see each other. The silence wasn't just an absence of a good morning. It was the absence of a plan. I went back to my desk, or PM. The light in my apartment shifted. The sun was no longer reflecting. It was just a bright, accusatory glare. The presentation surely was over. They had to break for lunch. They had to take a piss. My mind started to rewind the conversation from last night, playing it back in high definition. My voice, this irrational fear. My hands, twisting in my lap. His face, the slight pause. The smile that didn't reach his eyes. His kiss, brief, dry, careful. His words. That's a lot. That's a lot. Not, that's okay. Not, I get it. A lot. As in too much. A heavy object I'd asked him to carry. PM. I closed my laptop. The workday was over. The presentation was definitely, indisputably done. He was probably having a celebratory drink with his team. My phone on the desk had not lit up once. I had checked it, by my own silent, shamed count, 53 times. I didn't move. I just sat in my expensive ergonomic chair. The sun began to dip, and the city lights started to flicker on, one by one, a million tiny, indifferent jewels. The same view I'd shared with him, only 24 hours ago. It looked cold. The vulnerability hangover was gone. In its place was a cold, quiet dread. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't busy. This was a choice. My phone suddenly buzzed against the wood of the desk, a hard, rattling sound in the dead quiet. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I gasped. I snatched it, my hands fumbling, my breath caught in my throat. The screen lit up. A notification from my email. Lowe's. Your order for the bathroom fixtures has shipped. I dropped the phone. It clattered on the desk. The sound was obscene. I stared at it. I was the woman who built towers that touched the sky. I was not a woman who waited by the phone. I picked it up. I opened our message thread. I looked at my 6:35 a.m. text, unanswered. And then, my thumbs moving before my brain could stop them, I typed, "Are you okay?" I hit send. Send. The blue bubble with "Are you okay?" popped into the thread, landing with a soft swoosh that sounded like a final stupid surrender. Instant burning regret. My stomach hollowed out. I'd done it. I had double texted. I had broken the cardinal, unspoken rule of this new, fragile world. I had poked the silence. I had gone from the cool, confident architect to the neurotic, middle-aged woman checking her phone, all in the span of 9 hours. I had become the very person I'd confessed I was afraid of becoming. I stared at the screen, my own words accusing me. Morning. Hope your day isn't too brutal. Delivered 6:35 a.m. Are you okay? Delivered 5:02 p.m. My thumb hovered over the screen, possessed by the insane urge to type, "Sorry, ignore that, just worried." I clenched my fist and threw the phone onto the gray wool sofa. It bounced, screen up. I went to the kitchen. I would make dinner. I would act like a normal human. I opened the fridge. The same bottle of wine, the same tub of yogurt. I had no food. I hadn't shopped. I had been waiting for Mark to text, to make a plan for tonight. I slammed the fridge door. The sound echoed in the empty concrete box of my life. I walked back to the sofa. I would not look. I would turn on the TV. I would read a book. I would do anything but... I glanced at the screen from across the room, and I saw it. My breath stopped. I didn't even have to pick it up. The light from the screen was sharp in the dimming room. The small gray delivered under the 5:02 p.m. text was gone. In its place, in tiny bright blue letters, was the word read, and just above it, the 6:35 a.m. text. It also said read. He was on his phone, right now. He had seen them both. He had read my casual morning text, and he had read my nakedly anxious follow-up. I sat down, slowly, on the edge of the sofa, my eyes locked on the screen. My heart wasn't pounding. It was doing a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs, a sound so loud I thought I could hear it. This was it, the moment of truth. I waited. I was waiting for the 3 little dots. The pulsing, animated ellipsis that meant Mark 50 is typing. That was the signal. That was the breath before the word. He would write, "Oh my God, Ilara, so sorry. Day from hell. Just surfaced. Or got your messages. Can we talk? Anything." The phone screen was bright. The blue read receipts stared back at me, unblinking. I watched, and I waited. 1 minute passed. The clock on the microwave changed from 5:07 to 5:08. The screen on my phone dimmed, then went to sleep. I tapped it awake. Red. No dots. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the faint, high-pitched electrical whine of the stove clock. The city outside was alive, a million lights winking on, a million people starting their Friday nights. My Friday night was this, being held hostage by 2 small blue words. EPM, an hour. He'd read my texts an hour ago, 15 p.m. The dread was gone. Now it was something else, a cold, sharp numbness. This was no longer neglect, it was a message. The silence was the content. He had heard my confession of feeling invisible, and he had responded by making me invisible. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a clean, modern, digital execution. My hand moved as if controlled by someone else. I needed proof. I needed to see. The silence was an absence, but I needed a presence. My thumb, shaking slightly, tapped the green Instagram icon. I'd never looked him up. We weren't that. We were real world. We were no games. We weren't college kids following each other. I tapped the search bar. I typed his name, Mark 50. His profile was public. Of course it was. Charismatic, remember? My eyes went right to the top, to the circle with his profile picture. Him grinning on a boat, wearing sunglasses. There was a bright green and orange ring around it. A new story, posted, it said, 10 minutes ago. My blood ran cold. I felt the pressure drop in the room. I tapped the circle. The screen filled with a photograph. It was taken from a high angle, looking down. A massive bone-in ribeye steak, seared to a perfect dark crust, was splayed on a rustic wooden board. Beside it, a glass of deep, dark red wine. The background was blurry, but it was a restaurant. A busy one. I could see the out-of-focus twinkle of other lights. And at the bottom, in a casual, jaunty white font, closing the deal. He was out. He was eating. He was celebrating. I swallowed, my throat dry and aching. I felt dizzy, like I was looking at the picture from a great height. I closed the app. My fingers were numb, but they kept moving. I opened the one I'd used to vet him professionally, the one that felt safe. LinkedIn. I typed his name again. There he was. Mark, 50, management consultant, driving Q4 Synergy. I scrolled down. Mark's activity. The top item, Mark 50, liked this post. I clicked it. A post from a smiling woman I didn't know. So proud of my team for crushing our Q4 targets today. Couldn't have done it without our fearless leader, Mark 50. The post was time-stamped 1 hour ago, right after he'd read my texts. I dropped the phone onto the wool cushion. It landed with a soft, final thud. He was fine. He wasn't in a ditch. He wasn't in a hospital. He hadn't lost his phone. He was having a steak. He was being celebrated by his colleagues. He was closing his deals. He had read my 6:35 a.m. text and ignored it all day. He had read my 5:02 p.m. text, seen my anxiety, and his response was to post a picture of his dinner. The ghosting was no longer a fear. It was a fact. It was a delivered receipt. I was staring at the blueprint of my own abandonment, and the design was intentional, precise, and absolutely, unequivocally clear. On the sofa, the phone was dark. The room was dark. Outside, the city glittered, a frantic, indifferent light show, closing the deal. The image of the steak, the dark red wine, the jaunty white text. It was burned onto my retinas. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was celebrating. He had read my confession of fear and vulnerability, and he had gone for a ribeye. I don't know how long I sat there. The city lights moved across the polished concrete floor. At some point, I got up. I felt nothing. I was a shell, a well-designed, empty structure. I walked to the sink and turned on the tap. The water a hard, loud splash in the silence. I drank straight from the faucet, the water cold and tasting of metal. I went to bed. I didn't change. I lay on top of the covers, my work clothes still on, the silk blouse crinkling against the duvet. I placed the phone on the nightstand beside me, screen up. A black silent mirror. Sleep didn't come. Instead, my mind began its work. It unspooled the tape from Thursday night. It played the scene on the sofa over and over and over the loop. My voice. I need to be honest. His face. The slight, almost imperceptible tensing of his jaw. My voice. This irrational fear. His hand stilling on my shoulder. The warmth just stopping. My voice. That it's not real. That I'll wake up and it'll be gone. His smile. The polite, careful one that didn't reach his eyes. His words. That's a lot. That was it. That was the moment. The click of the deadbolt. I had handed him the blueprint of my damage, and he had seen a structural flaw too expensive to fix. He had seen baggage. He said he wanted no games. I thought honesty was the opposite of a game. I thought I was laying my cards on the table, face up. But maybe honesty is a game, the most dangerous one. And I had just played it and lost catastrophically. Was it the word fear? Was it irrational? Did I sound broken? The loop spun all night. At 4 a.m. I picked up the phone. The screen blazed to life, blinding me. I opened Instagram. His story was still there. 6 hours left until it vanished forever, like he was. I tapped it. The steak. Closing the deal. I watched it, my thumb pressed to the screen to hold the image. I was studying it, like an architect studying a rival's design, looking for the flaw. The flaw was me. I woke up on Saturday to the sun, not a text. My body ached. My neck was stiff. My mouth tasted like ash. The phone was silent. The apartment was silent. The 2 blue read receipts in our message thread had been there for 14 hours. I stood in the shower, the water scalding hot, trying to feel something. I was an architect. I dealt in concrete, in steel, in things that had weight and presence. How could an absence be this heavy? How could silence be this loud? It was a digital haunting. He was a ghost, but a ghost who was still posting to social media. A ghost who was liking things on LinkedIn. A ghost with an appetite. I had to get out. My fortress had become a tomb. I put on jeans. I didn't bother with makeup. I grabbed my keys, but not my phone. I couldn't. I left it on the granite counter, a ticking, silent bomb. I walked. I walked for hours. The city was loud. Saturday brunch. Couples sat at sidewalk cafes, their heads bent toward each other, their knees touching. They were laughing. A man pushed a stroller and his wife, his partner, put her hand on the small of his back. I felt like I was behind a wall of glass. I was in the city, but not of it. I was in my own minimalist invisible box. Every sign of connection I saw was a small, sharp paper cut. I finally went into a cafe, the smell of burnt coffee and sugar overwhelming. I ordered a black coffee. It was bitter, and I left it half full on the table. When I got back to my apartment, the first thing I saw was the phone. It was exactly where I'd left it. Dark, silent. The hope, the tiny, stupid ember of it, maybe he texted while I was out, was finally extinguished. It was Saturday night. 24 hours since I'd seen the read receipt. 48 hours since I'd seen his face. I sat on the sofa. The loop started again. Irrational fear. That's a lot. The steak. I'd made a mistake. I'd been too honest. I'd taken his casual, modern line about no games and mistaken it for an invitation to true, foundational vulnerability. He wanted the sleek, finished building. He didn't want to see the rebar and the messy concrete pour. I slept, this time in my bed, under the covers. It was a dead, dreamless sleep. I woke on Sunday morning. The silence was now old. It had settled like fine dust on every surface of my home. It was no longer a question. It was a statement, an answer. The silence was the no. It was the goodbye. It was the, you are too much. I looked at my phone. It was 10 a.m., 41 hours since the read receipt. I had to know. I couldn't live in the absence anymore. The not knowing, the void. It was a structural failure. It was making me fail. I couldn't think. I couldn't plan. I couldn't even breathe right. I needed a no. A no is a solid thing. It's a wall. You can touch it. You can lean on it. You can accept it and walk away. This digital void. It wasn't a wall, it was a fog. And I was lost in it. I picked up the phone. My hand was perfectly steady. The emotional storm had passed. I was just cold. I was an architect at a demolition site, holding the detonator. I needed to bring the condemned building down so I could see what was left. I opened his contact. Mark, 50. His picture, the one of him on the boat, smiled at me. I tapped the call icon. I put the phone to my ear. I didn't breathe. The sound of the line connecting. Then, the ring. A single electronic brrring. My heart stopped. A second brrring. I waited for the third, for it to go to his charming, confident voicemail, but it didn't. After the second ring, there was a sharp, sudden click, and then silence. Not voicemail, not a please leave a message, just click. Silence. He hadn't missed the call. He had seen my name flash on his screen, and he had actively, deliberately pressed the red button. He had rejected me. The phone to my ear, long after the call was over. The silence on the line wasn't the empty, waiting silence of a dead connection. It was a dense, pressurized silence. It was the sound of a door being slammed shut and locked, inches from my face. Click, the second ring. Click. He hadn't been in a meeting. He hadn't been driving. He had been there, holding his phone, looking at my name. And he had pressed the red icon. He had actively, deliberately, physically denied me access. I lowered the phone from my ear and stared at the screen. Call ended. The loop in my head, the replay of my confession, the agonizing why, stopped. It didn't fade, it shattered. The building didn't just collapse. It was a controlled demolition. The click was the detonator. There was no more ambiguity. There was no more, maybe he's busy, no more, maybe he's scared. There was only, he is fine, and he does not want to talk to you. He had heard my confession of feeling invisible, and his response was to ghost. He had seen my follow-up, my anxiety, and his response was a steak dinner. And now, when I'd reached out for a final, solid no, he had given it to me, not with a word, but with a click. The abandonment was total. It was efficient. It was, in its own way, as sleek and modern as the buildings I designed. I stood up from the sofa. My apartment, which had felt like a tomb all weekend, now just felt cold. The anger I'd expected wasn't there. The profound sadness I'd anticipated hadn't arrived. I just felt empty. A precision-carved void. I walked to the window. It was Sunday morning. Below, people were walking, carrying bags from a farmer's market, holding hands, pushing strollers. The world was moving and I was up here, frozen. I thought of him. I pictured him on his sofa, in his own expensive apartment. I saw my name flash on his screen. I saw his sigh, the faint, annoyed roll of his eyes, the quick, dismissive tap of his thumb. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a man who wanted no games and honesty, but only if the honesty was easy. He wanted a partner, but not a person. He wanted the finished, rendered image, not the messy blueprints. I looked at the phone in my hand. This was the portal. This was the open window he had climbed out of, but could just as easily climb back through. In a week, in a month, a 3 a.m. Hey, you up? When his other plans fell through, I would not be out. I would not live in a fortress with an open, unguarded door, waiting for an intruder who had already proven himself hostile. My thumbs, which had been numb and shaking for 2 days, were now perfectly steady. I tapped on his contact. Mark, 50, his smiling face from the boat. The charismatic, easygoing man who was too old for games. I looked at his picture for a long, cold moment. Then I scrolled down, past the text, past the call, all the way to the bottom. 2 words, in red. Block this caller. My thumb hovered. This was it. This was me taking the key back. This was me changing the locks. I pressed it. A confirmation popped up. You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from this contact. I pressed block contact. The red letters vanished. The contact was now in effect a one-way street. He was still in my phone, but he couldn't reach me. I wasn't done. I opened Instagram, searched his name, his smiling face, closing the deal. I tapped the 3 dots on his profile. Block, LinkedIn, searched his name. Driving Q4 Synergy. Block.I had digitally, methodically, and precisely excised him from my life. I had built the final wall. I had made the silence permanent, but now it was on my terms. I put the phone on the counter and went to the kitchen. I opened the fridge, the yogurt, the wine. I took them and the half-empty bag of bitter coffee, and I dropped them all into the trash. I took a shower. I scrubbed my skin until it was red. I put on running clothes, and I left my phone at home, and I went out, and I ran until my lungs burned and my legs were shaking. The city noise a welcome, roaring flood that drowned out everything. 1 week later, I was at my desk. It was Monday, 7 a.m. The sun was streaming through the glass, but the apartment was just bright. The color was gone. It was like looking at the world through a high-quality, desaturated filter. I was functional. I'd been functional all week. I had woken up at 6:30 a.m. every day to my alarm. I had made coffee that tasted like hot water. I had worked 12-hour days. I had spoken to Ben and our contractors with a crisp, efficient brevity that even I found chilling. I had eaten. I had slept. I was a perfect, functioning machine. My phone was on the desk beside me, but it was just a tool. It was a calculator, a calendar, a thing for work. It no longer held any power. I hadn't checked his social media. I hadn't looked at our message thread. I couldn't. He was blocked. I was staring at the blueprints for the library annex, the HVAC plans I'd fixed, the structural load charts. This was real, steel, concrete, the laws of physics. They didn't just decide to stop working. They didn't promise you a foundation and then vanish because you showed them the soil report. My computer chimed. A video call from Ben. I accepted. His face popped up looking tired. "Morning, Alara." "Ben," I said. My voice was flat. "Geez," he said, trying for a laugh. "You look focused. Listen, I'm sending over the revised budget for the annex. The city signed off. Good, send it." "Alara," he hesitated. He was my partner, my friend for 10 years. He knew me. "You've been quiet. You okay?" The question, "Are you okay?" the same one I typed into the void, landed like a stone. "I'm fine, Ben, just focused on the deadline." "Was there anything else?" He looked at me for a beat, his expression unreadable. No, I guess not. I'll send it over." The call ended. I turned back to my desk. I pushed him away, the one person who was actually present. I picked up my mechanical pencil, the 0.5mm lead, the one I used for fine detail. I was working on the atrium, the big, open, public space. A place for people to gather, a place for connection. I started sketching the benches, the ones that would curve along the south-facing glass. I drew a couple, just as placeholders, 2 small, simple figures sitting close. One had their head on the other's shoulder. My hand stopped. The pencil felt heavy. The world was still in full color. I just couldn't see it. It was all still happening out there. The laughter, the connection, the couples in the cafe, the hand on the back. He hadn't taken the color from the world. He'd just taken it from me. My hand tightened on the pencil. I pressed down just to feel the resistance of the paper. Snap. The fine 0.5mm lead broke, scattering dark gray shards across the clean white lines of the atrium. Tap of the pencil lead was the only sound in the room. It was sharp, brittle, and final. I stared at the tiny shards of 0.05mm graphite scattered across the blueprint of the atrium. Gray dust on a white clinical world. I had drawn two small, faceless figures, sitting close. Now a gray fracture ran right between them. My hand was still clenched around the pencil, the metal grooved into my palm. I was supposed to be working. I was supposed to be functional. Ben was waiting for my notes on the budget. The city was waiting for the revised atrium plan, but I was just staring at the broken lead. I couldn't focus. I couldn't build this new, beautiful, open space for people to connect in. Not when I felt like this. Not when my own foundation had been dynamited. I dropped the pencil. It rolled, clattering across the desk. I moved my mouse, my hand feeling heavy and distant, and closed the architectural software. The blueprints vanished. My desktop background appeared. A photo I'd taken of a minimalist concrete building in Japan. All clean lines and perfect cold shadows. My fortress. It looked like a prison. I clicked the icon for my word processor. A blank white document opened. The cursor, a single pulsing vertical line. A void, just like the one I'd been living in. I had been running from this all week. I had filled the silence with work, with exercise, with the meticulous, orderly process of blocking him from my life. But I hadn't processed anything. I had just built a retaining wall, and the pressure was building up behind it. The pencil snapped. The wall had a crack. I placed my fingers on the keyboard. I wasn't writing to him. I was done with that. I wasn't writing for a blog, or a journal, or for anyone. I was writing for me. I was an architect. I had to draft the damage report. I had to understand the structural failure before I could even think about rebuilding. I typed, "I am an architect." I believe in foundations. My fingers, which had been so cold, started to move faster. I spend my life analyzing soil reports, calculating load distribution, ensuring that what I build will stand for 100 years. A building without a foundation, or with a flawed one, isn't a building. It's a lie. It's a temporary set, waiting to collapse. I thought honesty was the foundation. I thought that's what we were building. He said, "No games." He said, "I just want a real partner." Someone honest. I believed him. I thought his words were the steel rebar. I thought his presence, his 6:04 a.m. texts, his hand on mine, I thought that was the concrete. So I did what an architect does. I showed him the site plan. I showed him the bedrock, my confession on the sofa. That was me, pointing to the fault lines. I wasn't showing him I was broken. I was showing him I was strong enough to be vulnerable. I was showing him where the ground was solid and where we would need to reinforce. I was giving him the truth, the most foundational thing I had. The cursor pulsed. The city outside was a muted midday hum, but he saw my foundation and called it a flaw. He saw a project that was too much work. He didn't want to build. He just wanted to move into a finished, fully furnished penthouse. He wanted the sleek, modern building, not the messy, complicated plans. He saw the truth, and he ran. But he didn't just run, he dissolved. I stopped typing. The word ghosted was what everyone used, but it felt wrong. A ghost is a remnant, a wisp, something left behind. Mark wasn't a remnant. He was an active, steak-eating, LinkedIn-liking absence. I typed again. He didn't run. He erased. In the modern world, silence is the new no. It's emotional abandonment delivered via fiber optics. The blue read receipt, left to hang in the air for 41 hours. The Instagram story of his dinner. The click of the rejected call. It's a clean, efficient, digital execution. It leaves no fingerprints. It gives you no argument. It offers no closure. It's a void, and it's designed to make you, the person left behind, fill that void with your own self-doubt. To make you the architect of your own misery. The loop in my head for that first 48 hours. It was me, replaying my own words, trying to find the flaw in my design. Was it the word fear? Or was it irrational? Did I sound broken? I was inspecting my own foundation, while he was already gone, closing the deal. My hands were shaking, but not from anxiety. It was a cold, sharp rage. a precise architectural anger. He didn't just end a relationship. He denied it ever mattered. That's the cruelty. That's the part that's been suffocating me. He didn't just walk away from what we were. He took 2 months of shared intimacy, of good morning texts, of holding hands in the dark, and he reclassified it as nothing. He made me feel like an illusion. He confirmed my deepest irrational fear, and in doing so, proved that it wasn't irrational at all. I read the last sentence back. Proved that it wasn't irrational at all. I leaned back in my chair. The truth of that settled on me, a heavy, solid weight. My fear hadn't been the flaw. My fear had been the warning. It was the soil report I had ignored. I looked at the document. It was all there. The blueprint of the failure. It wasn't my failure. It was his. I didn't save the file. I didn't need to. I'd built it. It was in my head now. I closed the document and clicked Don't Save. The white screen vanished. My desktop, the cold concrete building, returned. I looked at it. My fortress. I'd been hiding in here for a week. I'd been functional, but I hadn't been living. I'd been avoiding the world that had him, and people like him in it. The world had lost its color, but I was the one who had shut my eyes. I stood up. My legs felt steady. I was still empty, but it wasn't a void. It was an atrium. It was an open space waiting to be filled. I looked at the half-empty cup of coffee on my desk, the one I'd made at 6:30 a.m. It was cold, and it tasted like ash. I wanted a real coffee. I walked to my entryway. I grabbed my keys. They jingled, a sharp, bright sound. I slid my phone into my pocket. It wasn't a bomb anymore. It wasn't a lifeline. It was just a phone. I was going back to that cafe, the one from last Saturday. The one where I'd felt like a ghost, behind a wall of glass, watching the world. This time, I was going to walk through the door. The day was warm. It smelled not of the bitter, burnt coffee I'd tasted last weekend, but of steamed milk, cardamom, and something sweet, like baking pastries. The air was full of the low, chaotic murmur of other people's lives. A woman near me was laughing, a high, bright sound. A man at the counter was arguing with the barista about oat milk. The hiss of the steam wand was a sharp counterpoint to the jazz playing softly overhead. It was all just noise, but it was real. I sat at a small, 2-person table by the window, the same cafe I had hidden in, the one where I'd felt like a ghost behind glass. Today I felt solid. I was a part of the scene. The chair was hard wood beneath me. The ceramic mug was a heavy, warm weight in my hands. I was just Alara, a woman in a cafe on a Monday drinking a coffee. My phone was on the table, next to my mug. But it was just a phone, a black, quiet rectangle of glass and metal. It wasn't a portal to avoid. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a judge. It was a tool. I thought about the document I had typed, the one I had deleted. The words were still with me. I am an architect. I believe in foundations. I had told the truth, and I had been ghosted. That was the simple structural fact. I had shown him my blueprints, and he had failed the inspection. I replayed the loop one last time, but it was different. It wasn't the agonizing, self-doubting rewind of the weekend. It was a calm, dispassionate review of the facts. His promise, no games. His request, honesty. My delivery, the truth. His response, that's a lot. His action, click. Maybe my truth was a test, and he had failed. Or maybe more simply, he just wasn't strong enough to hold it. He wasn't a bad man or a good one. He was just a weak one. He was an architect who only built with flimsy drywall and facades, terrified of bedrock and rebar. He wanted a finished building, not the messy, complicated foundational plans. And I was suddenly profoundly tired. I was tired of designing things for people who were afraid of the foundation. I looked out the window. A woman walked by, her head down, scrolling on her phone, and nearly walked into a lamppost. I watched her, and for the first time, I didn't feel a connection to her anxiety. I just felt a little sorry for her. And then my phone buzzed. A hard, rattling bzzzt on the wooden table. My heart didn't stop. It didn't slam against my ribs, but I felt a jolt, a phantom limb of anxiety, A conditioned electric reflex. I flinched, just slightly, my eyes snapping to the dark screen. The screen lit up. A notification. Not a text. Not a message from a blocked number. It was a WhatsApp message from my partner, Ben. Saw the atrium notes. You're a genius. Also, you still owe me that dinner for finding the HVAC flaw. You free Friday? I read the words. You're a genius. You free Friday? A simple, solid, real-world message. A colleague, a friend, someone who saw my work, who valued it, someone asking for my time days in advance, someone who was present. A small, strange feeling pulled at the corner of my mouth. It was a smile. It was a sad smile. It was heavy with the exhaustion of the last 10 days. It was sad for the intimacy I thought I'd had. Sad for the man who wasn't strong enough. Sad for the part of me that had been so quick to believe him. But under the sadness, it was genuine. It was a real, small, tired smile. I looked at Ben's message on the glowing screen. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I reached out. I didn't reply. I didn't check anything else. I simply picked up the phone, turned it over, and placed it, deliberately, screen side down on the dark wood of the table. The light was gone. The portal was closed. It was just an object. I picked up my mug. I took a sip of the coffee. It was a dark roast, slightly bitter, but with a deep, warm, chocolatey note that spread through my chest. I could taste it. I drank it looking out the window at the real, chaotic, structural world, and I was finally at peace with the silence,